It's been about a year now since Novak Djokovic was deported, but emotions are still running high. People have different views on what happened. Many believe that what the tennis player did was extremely wrong and that he deserves backlash. But what exactly happened? In this video, we'll be taking a look at Novak Djokovic's claims that the media had picked on him big time in coverage of the deportation saga. So stay tuned. First off, Novak Djokovic lashes back at the media. The media has been criticizing Novak Djokovic for a long time now, but it's finally the 35-year-old's turn to speak his truth. He shot back at the media, claiming that all the various headlines they published were false. The tennis player built himself a bad reputation since his deportation from Australia last year, and it looks like he's finally trying to clear his name. He stated that his being back in the country to win the Australian Open Championship didn't mean that he had forgotten about everything that happened last year and how the incident had tainted his brand. While talking to 9 News Melbourne, he said the world was already in a frenzy because of the pandemic and the vaccine. As a result of his refusal to get the vaccine, Novak got sucked into the storm, and the global media isn't the type to let things rest easily. Athletes need to protect their reputation, as it means a lot for their career, and being put in a situation that causes them to look like a bad person really isn't good for them. Yet this is exactly what happened to Novak, and the player revealed that it had had a big impact on him and his loved ones. Coming up, how the backlash affected him. Now, the backlash got to the point Djokovic had to flee to Serbia. He said that he stayed there for several weeks and avoided leaving the house because he was afraid of running into the media. Things were really bad for several weeks, and all he wanted was for all of this to blow over. It did, eventually, but the traces persisted, and even now, a year later, it seems to follow him everywhere and portray him in a bad light. In fact, the whole thing affected his mental health badly, and even he himself wasn't prepared for just how much it would all bring him down. Seriously, even months after the whole saga, he had trouble focusing and putting everything behind him, which showed in how he played. It wasn't like the media had made it easy for him to move on. The after effects of what happened were everywhere, and people just weren't ready to let it go, no matter how much Novak himself just wanted to forget everything and carry on with his career. Everywhere he went, in every news appearance, there were at least 1 or 2 inquiries regarding Australia. Let's take a look at what happened. The fact that Djokovic was initially granted a vaccine exemption to enter the country after the city had been subjected for many months to some of the strictest COVID-19 lockdowns in the world last year angered Melburnians. Djokovic understood this, but according to the tennis player, the truth had been misconstrued. The media, he claimed, had presented him in the worst way possible. They ended up twisting the whole story, and to this day, people believe what they put out. The public was angry at him, and while he understood why, from their point of view, he wanted to clear his name and explain exactly what had happened. Most people don't realize he wasn't the only one given the exemption. 2 to 3 people had entered Australia about 10 days before Novak under the exception. The 35-year-old was just abiding by the rules, but one thing led to another, and before anyone knew it, the whole media was working under one big misconception, and Djokovic ended up being collateral damage. Now for why he didn't defend himself before. It was unknown who made the request because his exemption was confirmed by a panel of doctors and an independent organization, but he had arrived with all the necessary documentation. Still, when the media latches onto something, it doesn't let it go so easily, and everything gets out of hand soon enough. The tennis player was getting all kinds of labels, none of which were kind. He could have spoken up before, of course, but everything was just too much, and all of the media's negative attention was already on him. Speaking up then would have caused him more harm than good, and he decided that he didn't want to get into that. Of course, he did want to stay there and play tennis, but eventually he just decided to leave and go home because of all the chaos going on. Following up, how this affected his overall legacy. When asked if the issue had affected his overall legacy, Djokovic remarked that that the media had picked on me big time. He said that in the end, the worst thing about all of this was the fact that even now, a whole year later, people had the wrong idea about what happened. It would probably stay that way. The media heavily criticized him for a number of months, which caused a lot of disruption to his reputation. It affected both him and everyone around him, but this isn't something that will just go away, and he has to accept and cope with it. Of course, it won't undo or reverse everything he has accomplished throughout his career, both on and off the court, but it had such an impact and reverberated so widely that many people will continue to discuss and remember it for a very long time. Finally, Novak didn't regret his vaccination status despite being deported. Back then, he said that it wasn't in his hands, but he was hoping to get some positive news. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and he had to miss out on the tournament. Novak said that he didn't have any regrets about his decision. He mentioned that he was sad he couldn't play in the Open, but since that was a decision he made, he knew what the consequences would be and accepted them. And that was all. After being deported, he didn't have a professional match for quite a while. He said that in the last 15 to 20 years, he wasn't used to taking longer breaks between tournaments, but he'd obviously landed in that kind of situation now. He added that he was looking forward to playing in other indoor tournaments for the rest of that season. Now, he has finally returned to Melbourne to play in the Australian Open. Now, moving on to Djokovic's critics face being kicked out of Australian Open. First up, Craig Tiley says that hostility from the crowd against Novak won't be tolerated. Novak Djokovic came back to Australia nearly a year after he was deported due to being unvaccinated, and Craig Tiley, the tournament director, has issued an ultimatum for fans that anyone caught taunting the 9-time champion would be removed from the grounds. The current Tennis Australia CEO, Craig, admitted that he was unsure how Novak would be received by the crowd, but he wasn't willing to tolerate any hostility. In an interview with the Herald Sun, he said that if they disrupt other people's enjoyment, then they'd be out at once. He emphasized that they didn't want them on the site and that they'd be kicked out if they didn't stay away. Novak came to Australia in December to take part in the 2023 Adelaide International. Last year, his visa was canceled by border officials because he didn't qualify for a medical exemption from Australia's rules for unvaccinated visitors. At first, he had been exempted from the vaccine rules of the tournament because he had COVID-19 in the past 6 months. He won an appeal to stay for the tournament, but the immigration minister of Australia revoked his visa. 3 federal court judges ruled in favor of the immigration minister's right to revoke Novak's visa, and he was deported. The entire fiasco was very controversial, but Craig says that he expects fans to be respectful of Novak and the sport. Next up, Novak appealed to be treated well by the public. Djokovic said that the one thing he's always liked about Melbourne is that people greatly appreciate excellence and sport. He continued that fans from Victoria and Melbourne understand the sport well, and that there isn't another city in the world that understands it as well as they do. Novak appealed to be treated well by the public, which certainly seemed to be the case in Adelaide. He could also count on the support of the large population of Serbian descent in the Victorian capital. Lastly, Novak says when he got deported in 2022 is a valuable life experience for him. Referring to what happened in 2022, Novak said that this time he had all the valid papers and said that he really hoped the crowd would receive him well, but it was something he couldn't predict. What's more, he said that although he hoped for a positive reception, he didn't hold any grudges and wasn't against the people of Australia. According to him, his being at Melbourne currently proves how much he wants to be there and how much he wants to play. He added that he couldn't forget those events since it's something he never went through before and he hopes he never will again, but he still considers it a valuable life experience and it will stay that way. Novak said that he had to move on, and what happened 12 months ago wasn't easy for him, his family, or his team. Besides, it was disappointing to leave the country in that manner. He mentioned that he'd been hoping to get permission to play in Australia because it's a country where he's got a lot of support, and he's always always played his best tennis there. Recently, Novak scared his fans when he suffered an injury. Throughout an exhibition match against Daniil Medvedev from Russia, he was seen receiving treatment on his left leg. The match lasted for less than 40 minutes. After Novak withdrew from the practice match, he said that he felt it pulling and didn't want it to get worse. He apologized to Daniil, saying that he pulled out because he wanted to avoid any big scares before the Australian Open. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Djokovic was treated unfairly by the media? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.